You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place. Hello, Arcane Carolinas! I am your co-host, wearer of pants, which is rare these days. Captain on this journey of discovery, Charlie Mushaw.
Gosh, I feel like I am your very mundane co-host, award-winning novelist Michael G. Williams, who's just like sitting comfortably in front of the microphone, and I'm wearing shorts and a tank top and chilling out.
Not starting by running across the room yelling hello. And
yeah, no, I didn't do any of that stuff. In fact, I like creaked and groaned and moaned and mumbled my whole way upstairs to do this.
Now I just feel like a braggart about the pants.
I did wear pants this morning, so I wore like long pants for a thing.
I was going to leave the house today.
Wow.
I didn't, but I was gonna. I had a whole plan. So now the front hall is filled with recycling that I should probably do something about at some point.
Yeah.
Before it becomes a problem. Cool. Today, I want you to hit me with your best Squatch because it's yet another Bigfoot episode.
Okay, we made it through that. I do think that we have like really good bourbon, for instance, set Sasquatch on a high shelf and waited until the moment was right to take him down off the shelf and talk about him. I have been looking forward to this for months.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about Bigfoot fall 2020 at Dragon Con as part of the American Sci-Fi Classics track, and that was really fun. But because that event is in the state of Georgia, the story that you related was from Georgia.
Exactly.
And there's Bigfoot legends everywhere, and people call them different things: Sasquatch, wood boogers, skunk apes, whatever, depending on their location. There's so many Bigfoot stories around the world and even in the Carolinas that we could have a podcast that was only Sasquatch stories, Bigfoot stories, whatever you want to call it.
Oh, I'm sure there probably are multiple podcasts that are just Bigfoot stories.
I mean, they got like 7 seasons out of that Finding Bigfoot show where the dude just rides around being like, I'm the first person that discovered they knock on trees. Neat.
You'd think after that much looking that they'd find him. I don't know.
We're going to get into so much stuff on this episode, and I am excited. So what we're going to do today, we're going to hop around a little bit. We're going to do North Carolina. We're going to do South Carolina. We're going to do old. We're going to do contemporary. So first, I want to start off by plugging local businesses, which we try to do. I'm going to hop around. If you're into Bigfoot and you're in North Carolina or even, the upper part of South Carolina, the Marion, North Carolina Bigfoot Festival will be returning in September of 2021.
Oh, that's excellent.
So they weren't able to have it last year. It will be returning this year. Another cryptid theme festival is one that we've mentioned before in Bishopville, South Carolina, and that is the Lizard Man Festival.
Yeah.
The 2021 date is pending. I could not find updated information for this year's event, but the Facebook page still exists. So there's no reason to believe that it won't return. And lastly, if festivals aren't your thing or you're looking for something a little bit more low key, you can go to the Cryptozoological and Paranormal Museum in Littleton, North Carolina.
That's right. I think I remember us talking about that at one point, like offline, like not as part of this show. Wow.
Yeah.
I really want to go there.
Yeah, they have like castings of supposed Bigfoot prints and lots of cryptid type things. And then they also have just like weird, spooky stuff. If you're into cryptids, there's stuff there for you. If you're into just weird, spooky stuff in general, there's stuff there for you. If you don't like mannequins, like dummy puppet mannequin things, they have one hanging on the wall that looks really weird in one of the photos I saw. So be warned, that is a thing.
Definitely.
And I also want to, on a personal note, thank you for trusting me to drive on this episode because, like you said, you're super into Sasquatch and Bigfoot lore.
Yeah, but I feel like you're the subject matter expert.
To be 100% transparent, I really like aquatic cryptid stories more as like my personal favorites. So digging into this was really fun, and I got a little out of hand, which we will find out about in a second. So let's take before we get into getting completely out of hand with the research, let's define what Bigfoot is for the sake of this episode so that there's no confusion about what we're talking about. I'll give my definition and then you can piggyback on it or tell me I'm wrong. I think of Bigfoot as like a bipedal, hairy primate, distinct from monkeys, gorillas, orangutans. Some folks will say that Bigfoot is the missing evolutionary link between Neanderthals and humans and monkeys and all that. I don't think that's the case because I saw the documentary filmed in real time in which he was exposed as an alien robot fashioned in the visage of Andre the Giant.
Yes, go ahead. By all means. Sorry.
Lee Majors just disproved that. No, but when I think Bigfoot, in my head, the definition of Bigfoot is bipedal, hairy primate that just hasn't been discovered yet by science.
I think that's a great definition. For me, it's distinctly not the missing link. It's some parallel evolution, some other kind of thing that might, if it's real, this is a big if, and if that one could drive a truck through, and it could be a big truck. But if it's real, then in a like very concrete biological sense, then I don't think that it's the missing link. I think it's something that evolved separately from some of the same original species.
I mean, just look at Australia, right? They got all kinds of weird stuff. And we're going to get to Australia actually later. We're going all around the world before we come back to the Carolinas on this.
Okay.
Let me crack open my jar of crazy here. Before we do that, one last thing before we do that.
Sure.
Wild man stories seem to be almost synonymous with Bigfoot stories in early accounts. There's a lot of potential Bigfoot occurrences that get categorized or described as wild man appearances in literature as well as just the news going back a couple of years. All right, let's get nuts. Early accounts of wild men or large hairy ape man creatures go back to ancient Mesopotamia.
What?
Yes. So ancient Mesopotamia mythological figure Enkidu. I could be pronouncing that wrong. I don't know. My Sumerian's not great. So ancient Mesopotamian mythological figure Enkidu appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh as a man-like but distinct, abundantly hairy and primitive creature. Enkidu lives roaming with herds or animals, grazing and drinking from rivers with beasts.
That's Bigfoot.
And he eventually, over the course of the epic, is brought into a degree into society, but remains like distinctly different, which is very interesting to me. And without getting too graphic, we'll just say that love is what brings him into society.
Oh,
yes.
Heavens.
But yeah, I thought it was interesting for people that chase the evolutionary missing link theory that would align with that. Jumping forward a bit, medieval European cultures, including distinct Celtic, Slavic, Nordic, and Germanic traditions in the Middle Ages, all had their own folklore about hair-covered wild men that ran about in the woods, distinct from what you would think of as a normal person and completely removed from society, with emphasis on their wild nature and hairy appearance and animalistic tendencies. So I don't doubt that there were outcasts from society back then that might have lived in the woods and had unkempt appearance.
Oh, totally.
But again, it's the abundant hair and animalistic tendencies that I'm like, okay, all right, interesting.
In much the same way that I feel, and I think I've even said before on this show, that the ways in which basically every culture has ghost stories, and ghost stories are similar in terms of the nature of ghosts, what drives them to be, what they do when they're around, things like that. The fact that there's so much overlap across cultural lines, including across cultures that never actually met, either because they were so distant geographically or temporally in time, that to me, that's not exactly verification, but it's very suggestive that there is something there.
And that's why I went so far back in time on this. And I wanted to break out, you'll notice that I'm making giant leaps geographically. And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, is these stories have been around forever. And it's very interesting in that sense. I think a lot of people are familiar with the snowy varieties, like Yetis, Indo-Tibetan type stuff. There's multiple kids movies made in the last couple of years about that. I have sat through some good ones and some very bad ones.
And like everybody who grew up watching Bugs Bunny has seen Abominable Snowmen stories and stuff like that.
So from the book Himalayan Anthropology, the Indo-Tibetan Interface, which is a title that just rolls off the tongue. According to author H. Seiger, the Yeti was a part of a pre-Buddhist belief system that was a part of several independent Himalayan cultures, stating that he was told by the Lepcha people that they worshipped a glacier being as god of the hunt. He reported that followers of, I believe it's pronounced bone religion, believed that the blood of the mere god or wild man had use in spiritual ceremonies. And that mere god, that roughly translates to wild man based on this book, was depicted as an ape-like creature who carried a large stone as a weapon. And it was so heavy, it would make a whistling swoosh sound when swung.
Wow.
And all I can think is Captain Caveman. That was a terrible Captain Caveman, but yeah. Very Captain Caveman, right? Like carrying around a stalactite or whatever.
Yeah. That's pretty wild.
So that's two different Himalayan cultures that had this similar creature. And again, we're hopping all over the world. Let's go down into the South Pacific to Australia, where lots of weird stuff grows. This one is particularly interesting because of the term that they use. Like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different words and terms and things that people call Bigfoot. And down in Australia, Yowie is used. And that is something that we actually sometimes hear used in North America as well, in the Pacific Northwest. I've read descriptions of people using. So the Yowie is usually described in Australian accounts as hairy, ape-like creature, stands upright between 6 and 12 feet, which to me, I was just like, I guess tiny humans are 3 feet and big humans are 6 feet. So
quite a range, though.
And according to folklore, the Yowie's feet are described as much larger than a human's. But where inconsistencies start to line up in Australian Bigfoot hunters is the shape and toe number is a little weird. Like some people will be like, I got Yowie tracks, and it'll have like a different number of toes than some other Yowie track. It's a little squishy. The nose is described as wide and flat like a gorilla, kind of like, like smushed, and it's got like the nostrils on the like flared out on the side.
Yeah.
Reports of their behavior are also extremely varied, where some people say the Yowie are timid and shy. Others describe the Yowie as occasionally violent or aggressive. And I'm like, I don't want to be dismissive because of the differences, because we all have our bad days, right?
Yeah, that's true. We do all have bad days. And, the same animal can react very differently to two different people. Anybody who's had a dog or a cat or anything, a snake, has seen it react differently to one person from how it did to another person. And especially creatures that are very aware of humans tend to be very pronounced in the differences in how they'll approach different people for whatever reason. And that can be totally mysterious to us.
Hormones, pheromones, whatever, they smell a way that the animal doesn't like.
And the people who say the Bigfoot is violent, maybe they're people who, decided to quote unquote fire a warning shot.
Right. I was throwing rocks at it. I don't know why it got mad. Here, let me throw some rocks at you and we'll see how it goes.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a translation from Native Australians that's similar, but pronounced Yahoo.
Oh,
yeah.
Is that where that word comes from?
I didn't get into the linguistics on that.
Okay.
Because I thought that. I was like, interesting, weird. And I was like, you are way too far back in time and you need to bring this back to the Carolinas. Let it go. So it's pronounced Yahoo. And that's like the Aboriginal term for the beast. I found an account from someone who went by the name Old Bungaree.
Okay.
As opposed to Young Bungaree or middle-aged Bungaree. Actually, that'd be a fun rap name, Lil Bungaree.
Maybe they hadn't invented senior and junior yet. They just had like.
No, but you know what I mean? How like you get your rap name is you just put Lil in front of something.
Right.
Right. There you go. Gonna be huge. Gonna sell one record to you. Anyway, so Old Bungaree was a Gunnedah Aboriginal. And according to this firsthand account, he stated that at one time there were tribes of Yahoos and that they, not the Aborigines, were the actual original inhabitants of the land.
Interesting, because that would line up with some of the Bigfoot legends from North America even.
Referred to them as the old race, distinct from men, and often in conflict. with the Aborigines. And that was from an old book called the Wallabada Manuscript. This is going to be hell for you to edit. I am sorry.
It's okay. You got to say the name one. You got to
leave it in.
You got to say the name again, though, without me laughing over it.
No, I don't. Leave it all in.
Okay.
Me not knowing how to pronounce this word that is completely foreign to me is good listening.
There you go.
I don't purport to be an expert on ancient Australian culture.
Okay.
And I don't mispronounce it with any disrespect.
That's totally fair.
So the Wallabada Manuscript, Recollections of the... Listen to this title. Wallabada Manuscript, Recollections of Early Days, the Early History of the Northern Districts of New South Wales.
Oh, good grief. Jeez. That had to have been published in Victorian era.
Yeah, so it's an old book. And it's filled with really interesting and some really terrible stories about the early colonization of Australia. So it's an honest account of what happened in those days. And the interesting parts are like the things that I just shared, where that they would say like, and then we talked to this old person from the bush, and they taught us about these things, as opposed to, and then we kicked them out of their village.
Yeah. Without diving into it, there's an episode coming up that I have been doing research for where it's very similar, where a lot of the early accounts are. We found a very old person from this Native American tribe, and they told us a legend right before we forced them out.
Right. So the bits of the manuscript that I read, there was some interesting stuff, there was some sad stuff, and there was Bigfoot stuff, which was like, all right. All of that being well and good, we have established that from the dawn of civilization, there have been stories that are Bigfoot-like, if not straight up Bigfoot stories.
Yeah.
Across the world.
I think that's a very valid claim.
As I mentioned, you could do an entire podcast series where all you talked about was Bigfoot. So I'm not going to go super hard on the North American legends and lore at this point, because that could be its own full episode. I'm instead going to do one old story from North Carolina and one contemporary story from South Carolina. And we will come back to Bigfoot and Sasquatch and stuff in another episode. It won't be the next episode, but at some point over time, we'll do more of these. Journey with me, if you will, to the year 1793.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Newspapers were being published that included an account describing a wild, hair-covered, bipedal being with a wonky-looking head called by local Cherokee natives Koodlay, or hairy man, roughly translated to hairy thing, possibly man bear, in the Blue Ridge Mountains, specifically Bald Mountain, North Carolina.
Okay.
The term Bigfoot wasn't really around back then. So when I was digging through old newspapers, a lot of them use the term wild man or a wild man of the woods. You sort of have to sift through the ones that are legitimately just about a hermit that was like, don't come near my shin. People that chose to leave society, and those that describe something else. But yeah, 1793. That was the earliest written one I could find in North Carolina. And it was just Cherokee natives say there's this hairy man that lives on the mountain and kind of runs the show, and they stay away from him.
Probably smart on their parts.
Right. I was like, oh, okay.
One of the things about the Appalachians, especially at that time, that I don't think a lot of people realize is how incredibly dense they were. There were trade routes, there were Native American trading trails, things like that. There were obviously methods of traveling through those areas, and there were population centers. There were a lot of Native American towns. There were a lot of colonial locations, but there were just vast expanses of completely untouched, almost impassable forest between those places, to the point that when George Washington was surveying, because he literally acted as a surveyor in the Appalachian Mountains in the 18th century, he was recording having seen trees that were 45 feet wide at the base, because this was just incredibly ancient, untouched forest. It was so dense that there was absolutely no predicting what life one could find in there. Plenty of places for Bigfoot to hide.
So not a tropical rainforest, but what we think of when you watch those shows where people are like trampsing through the jungle and stuff, and there's like lots of vines and whatnot. The North American version of that would be a thicket, briars and real thick undergrowth. If you've ever actually experienced that, that it's a pain. Just most people's experience with the woods happens to be manicured state parks and controlled environments environments. But if you really get out there in the wilderness, you can still find impassable bits of forest. Like you said, right? So you have your trade routes and you have your outposts. And in between there, it's just like a wall of vegetation and growth.
Yeah. Imagine having to climb through a rhododendron bush or a bramble or anything to get anywhere.
And then do it again.
Right. And then to do it again continuously for like 50 miles.
Right. Not fun. That was like a super early account, the earliest one I could find on record in North Carolina. I got one with a little bit more detail that was very widely reported, and the story got repeated across multiple newspapers. Oddly, so this one was reported in the Statesville Landmark, the Piedmont Press, and very curiously, the McKean County Miner out of Pennsylvania. This was like big news. Something happened and people were very into this occurrence. There was an account of an encounter in November of 1877. That's when it happened. And there was a small story, and then it snowballed into this wide reporting in January of 1878. And you think about how word would travel back then, that kind of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So they have telegraph service, but, you know, a small, I'm going to post in the show notes for this, what made the news back then. So it might just be like, oh, Jenny Smith is coming to town to see visitors. Might be a story. It is a story in the clipping that I have from this. Like, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there. So things traveled very slowly. You had to sort of sift through stuff for the stories to get fleshed out. By 1878, January of 1878, after the November 1877 occurrence, things had been fleshed out and follow-ups had been done, and then the stories sort of began to emerge of some prospectors in Caldwell County, North Carolina, having encountered a beast with, in their words, apish arms. I'm picturing like King Louis from Jungle Book.
Yeah.
Covered in hair and standing upright with a cone-shaped head. Like Harry and the Hendersons. Like, like what are those jerky commercials? Messing with Squatch. Like the absolute like caricaturist description of Sasquatch that you could possibly give. But again, this was supposed to have occurred in November of 1877. So like cartoons of Bigfoot didn't exist. Pop culture depictions of Bigfoot didn't exist. This was just something that these people described with no motivation for financial gain at the time, because it wasn't really a phenomenon. Like there was no Bigfoot hunters merchandise to be sold at this time.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked before about sort of the X-Files effect, the way that like big pop cultural representations of weird stuff will act as a focusing lens for later accounts of that weird stuff. So basically anything that got talked about in any episode of the X-Files, reports of the same thing afterwards would sound a lot like that X-Files episode. There is zero chance for that to have happened here.
And they apparently were able to get within 60 feet of it before it pounded on its chest, made auditory noises, what they described as yelling, and then ran into the woods as fast as a deer.
Damn.
And I find it interesting that they use the as fast as a deer, because that is a consistent description of Bigfoot encounters when they flee. They're like, it was as fast as a deer. Whether or not it's actually as fast as a deer doesn't matter. The point is that it's moving faster than modern human being would.
Yeah.
They apparently decided to go after it. Not immediately. They thought for a second. They were like, we should probably check that out.
I had to take a vote. You know.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't.
To reach consensus.
Hell no. If I'm one of three dudes panning for gold, like you're panning for gold and a monster comes and like King Kong's at you, just like beats its chest and yells and then runs away. I'm going to go like, cool, let's not go that way. It obviously does not want us to go that way.
I think it will not surprise you to hear that my response would probably be like, how about we give it 20 seconds and then let's just stroll in that direction and see what happens.
1877, Charlie says no.
Fair.
1877, Charlie was just hoping to live to the ripe old age of 32.
Yes, that's true. A noble goal.
Life expectancy wasn't that bad back then.
No.
But if a Squatch gets a hold of you and breaks your arm, that's not great.
Significant trauma.
Significant trauma. That's the name of Lil Gungaree's album. It's a Sasquatch themed album. So they reach consensus and they decide that they're going to go into the woods, and they go out there and they're kicking around. And I would imagine, and I'm projecting a lot. This is all me. This is not from the story. This is me injecting my own opinion. If these are prospectors whose job it is to go out and pan for gold and try to find locations, they're in the wilderness. They're probably very good hunter trackers.
Yeah.
They have probably seen a lot of wildlife, because you need to eat when you're out there. And, the easiest way to get sustenance if you're out in the wilderness for a while is to harvest it. That's important because they located a small cave with a bed made of leaves and scattered bones believed to be that of possum strewn about.
Okay.
If you're this sort of wilderness dwelling, making your own way in the world person who's likely in the know about what an animal's den should look like, and you think that this is not that, I think that carries some weight.
Yeah, I think for sure. These are people who they probably know what the bones of possums look like. Right. These are also people who know what animal dens look like, and they're going to know what different animals' dens look like.
From there, it gets a little out of control, and the X-Files factor takes effect. And I always say the Jaws effect, where a bunch of people show up. So they went back to town and said, like, hey, this thing happened. For a week or two, people would go march around in the woods trying to find it. The story circulated more. And they didn't find it, and that's the end of the story. The follow-up was basically, some folks said that it ate a person. There is no record of it having eaten anybody. The newspapers were they still are pretty fast and loose with some stuff.
Yeah.
And they were reporting things like Victorian era airships appearing around the country. Like, I love that phenomenon. We should absolutely talk about that.
Yes. I started literally to say this is the era of airship sightings, and the way that airship sightings would move around the country in a pattern that followed supposedly the airships, but in potential reality, also the pattern of information flow from one newspaper to the next competitor in the town over.
Exactly.
But we should definitely find an airship story from the Carolinas.
Wilmington had one.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, we've got to talk about that.
I'm pretty sure Wilmington had one coming in off the ocean.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I recall reading a similar story to that. I believe it was Wilmington. This is not the airship episode.
Yeah, that's true. To take it back to Bigfoot, two thoughts.
He was driving the airship.
There are stories about that too, but I will set it aside. Two thoughts that occur to me. If I were a prospector and I wanted to keep people away from my claim, would I tell them that Bigfoot was seen there?
I don't think so.
Or would I tell them that Bigfoot was seen somewhere else and send them all that direction?
Yeah, that's good. There is that. Yeah.
Or is the average 19th century prospector living on the side of a 45-degree hill not that complicated in their chest?
I've watched Deadwood, and I believe that there are certain ones that would be.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That is a really good point. I think when I was reading it, I had initially thought that, but I had written it off because I hadn't really considered maybe they were doing it to keep people away. I was doing it as why would they attract people to their claim? But the decoy move, that could be a motivator.
I don't know. Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, no, I like that, which is good. That is a perfect transition because now we're going to leap to more modern times. People might not realize it's not always in the mountains that people report seeing Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
Very common for people in the Carolinas to report them in the mountains. The bigger Bigfoot stories, at least in North Carolina, come from the mountains.
Sure.
But the sightings are not exclusive to that region. We're going to go down to South Carolina for one that is pretty jacked up and I think is a hoax, straight up.
Okay.
So there are a lot of charlatans in this area of discussion and people that should be held accountable, I guess maybe is the right word. I don't know. I don't like the exploitative stuff. Perfect example. This person should have been charged criminally for wasting everybody's time. There was a guy, I don't think that's actually a crime. You, sir, are guilty of wasting people's time. Now we're going to waste yours. That's the punishment.
I thought you were going to say you, sir, are guilty of wasting time, and now we're going to waste you.
In the 1800s, maybe. Today, no. It was in the mid 2000s. I want to say like 2006, 2007, somewhere in there. I remember this happening because where I worked, they had like filters on the internet, so you couldn't get wherever you wanted to go. Like, like you can only go to these work-related websites.
Right.
And somebody claimed to have Bigfoot in their freezer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah. It was a hunter and he claimed to have it, but it was really just like a rubber gorilla suit full of meat. Like literally like went to Spirit Halloween, bought a gorilla suit and filled it with Chuck. It's just beef-filled gorilla. And had the audacity to submit it for lab analysis, selling like, I'm going to sell the rights to, you can look at it you can examine it, and I'm going to sell this, I'm going to sell that. And the lab results came back and it's like, okay, well, there's some nylon and some cow and maybe some rubber. Literally a gorilla suit filled with steak.
If I remember correctly, didn't the same person try to pull off a very similar hoax 5 years later where he claimed he had hair from a Bigfoot that he had sent off to a lab to be DNA analyzed?
Yeah, because I remember them being like, this is the freezer guy. And being like,
yeah.
I don't even care anymore.
Yeah.
Freezer guy can take a hike.
I don't know what the deal is driving that, because obviously this person did not exactly profit off of their endeavors. I think they thought they could profit off of it. I don't know how they thought that worked. I feel like that whole gag of, like 1 idea, 2 question marks, 3 profit is very much in play here.
Not everybody can be P.T. Barnum.
Right.
Say what you will about him. The man knew how to take nothing and turn it into money, and not everybody has that ability.
Anyway, sorry, go ahead. I did not mean to interrupt.
No, that's fine. So in 1997, in Nisa, South Carolina, which is a tiny town in Orangeburg County, smack dab in the middle of the state.
Okay.
A report of an 8-foot tall, fat in the description, hairy creature with a bald face, giant eyes, and big, yellow, blocky teeth.
Very specific detail.
Also, what Sasquatch living in the center of South Carolina is eating so good that it can get fat?
Probably a lot of deer.
just fast food deer. Nom, 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 nom.
And for that matter, there's probably a lot of possum.
Yeah, okay. So the story goes that this creature was messing with a fenced-in kennel trying to get some dogs.
Oh.
And 2 people reporting the story stated that they heard the dogs going nuts out back. When they saw what was happening, they ran out back and started screaming, and the creature ran off into the woods.
Interesting. Do they say anything about the smell?
No.
Okay.
Okay, perfect example. Bears. Bears stink. You can smell a bear coming.
Yeah.
Right? Large animals that live in the woods covered in fur are going to smell. And that is a common thing in Bigfoot sightings where people will report like, and it smelled horrible.
I mean, that's where the term skunk ape comes from.
It's not an intoxicating musk.
No, there's never going to be an eau de toilette of them.
Right. This is where it really starts to go off the rails. Because up until then, I'm like, okay, oddly specific. Never heard of a fat squatch, but okay.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
It was 2 brothers, aged 14 and 16, reporting this.
Mm.
And again, I'm like, all right, Bigfoot doesn't discriminate on age, but they did so by calling the local paper and presenting over the phone as a 23-year-old woman.
Okay.
And the paper ran the story, no questions asked.
Oh, that's probably a slow news day in Orangeburg County.
So it later comes out like who really reported it, because, the police are like, wait, what? Why didn't anybody call us?
Right.
So they track these kids down and they're like, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, it was to protect our identities. No one had seen that creature in the area before. No one saw it after. 2 bored teenagers home from school on the summer.
Yeah, that's a hoax.
Making a story, seeing if they can get it in the paper, and congrats, you did.
That's clearly just a prank.
And I didn't really zero in on the names of these people while giving this account because their last name is Hutto, Hutto. It is shockingly common for a surname in South Carolina. And
I don't know why that's so funny to me, except that I expected you to say in this town, and it was going to turn out that like literally every person in the town is a cousin.
It's madness. And the lady's name that they used, even to the age, there's got to be a dozen of them. Like, you can't make up a more generic name in this area. And one of the brothers was able to correlate based on the ages and the names of the brothers. One of them passed away.
Oh, okay.
So I was just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It was a hoax. They were 14 and 16 and having a laugh.
Yeah. Once I have departed this world, please do not let me be remembered by the dumb stuff I did when I was 14.
Exactly. So we talked a little bit about the smell and stuff. We talked about common occurrences across sightings. Some folks have reported descriptions that kind of match a bear with mange. See,
okay, this was going to be one of my questions. Are there alternative theories for what people might be seeing?
So bears can stand up on their hind legs.
Oh, yeah.
They do, whatever. But if they're going to run, they drop down to all fours and really haul. And there are Bigfoot accounts where that's how the creature escaped.
Ah, okay.
That wasn't in either of the accounts that I gave today. But have you ever seen a picture of a bear with mange?
No, I have not. Not with mange.
Okay. It's weird looking. it's like a really bad case where it's a mostly naked bear, because they're generally pretty sickly, right? Like it's not a good look. I don't want to post anything about that in the show notes or anything, but I bring it up because if you saw this at a distance, you could be like, what's that? Because it doesn't look like what you think of when there would be a disconnect.
Just this week, there were stories in the local news about a bear being sighted, if I remember correctly, in Asheville, and it was sighted standing up, and there were photos of it standing up, and apparently so many people saw it just like standing there in somebody's yard or wherever that it like freaked people out to see what from, glancing out your kitchen window kind of looked like a Sasquatch in the first place.
Right.
The photographs of it don't look like a bear standing up. Even though it is demonstrably a bear standing on its hind legs, if you just glance at the photograph, you don't think bear.
Do you have any honey?
Right.
Get out of here, Pooh.
It's a little red vest.
Spare some honey.
No pants,
Living his best life.
Totally. Who among us hasn't had a weekend like that?
Dare to dream. Dare to dream. So there's these common threads, ways to explain stuff away as well. Do I think there's the possibility of a bipedal primate somewhere in the world that we haven't discovered yet? Sure, absolutely. Why haven't we discovered the remains at that point is a point of skepticism for me. But if they do exist in like remote locations or places where fossils are unable to form, I could explain it, right? If there weren't a lot of them around to begin with and they just rot. The fossil record is incredibly thin.
Also, frankly, if they are as advanced as some of the stories about them suggest, they may have a culture of disposing of the bodies of their dead in some way that makes them unavailable to us to discover.
Ooh, I like that. What if it's not a rock that whistles with the snow one, but it's the bones of its deceased?
I like that a lot.
Yeah. But yes, I'm not willing to rule out Bigfoot. I'm not. But I don't think that every bent tree you see in the woods or every knock you hear is Bigfoot. Yeah. I think those people are seeing and hearing what they want to see.
I think that a lot of the sounds that you hear recorded by people who describe themselves as people who are in search of cryptids, I think that a lot of the sounds you hear that are supposedly knocking on tree trunks are frankly the sounds that anybody who has lived in the woods are familiar with, which is, the sound of tree trunks kind of snapping and cracking and popping as they shift, which is a normal, natural sound. Doesn't mean that the tree is about to come crashing down either. Like it's just sounds that they make. Sometimes it's just tree branches knocking into other trees.
We've talked about this, and we are always very clear that we do not claim to be the keepers of some hidden knowledge. We are not going to be the people that tell you we discovered that if a tree bends 47 degrees on a Tuesday, that it means that Sasquatch touched it. That's not us. We just really like looking at the historical context behind this stuff. And this episode basically serves as a gateway to future Bigfoot discussions.
Yeah.
So now we've sort of laid the groundwork about what we mean when we talk about Bigfoot.
Also, I want to just reiterate, again, this is something we've said before, but I don't see myself as a believer and I don't see myself as a skeptic. I think that both of those terms have effectively become dogmatic at this point and represent a set of beliefs that the people who identify in that way tend to adhere to. And I'm not interested in adhering to a dogma. I think that it is very likely that a lot of people have genuinely experienced something that they cannot explain. I think that there is at least anecdotal evidence that if it's not beyond the level of coincidence, then my gosh, it's a heck of a coincidence across multiple cultures, multiple places, multiple times, multiple peoples who each have their own contextual explanation for it, but ultimately describe the same thing. I think that lends a lot of credence to people's experiences. And I think that a lot of the stuff that we get told is quote unquote proof is just bogus on its face.
Like those two brothers calling in Sasquatch to the paper, pretending to be a lady. Can you imagine being on the receiving end of that call? Hello? Yeah. Hello? I'm totally a 23-year-old woman. You sound like a 14-year-old. No. I just saw a big, tell him it's fat. I saw a big fat Bigfoot. Tell him it was hairy. Oh, it was hairy. Had yellow teeth. Yeah, and yellow teeth.
That's what they tell the newspaper so that when it gets printed, they know it was their story and not somebody else's Bigfoot story.
It is. Wow, that's horrifying. Are you okay? Oh yeah, we're all fine here. What was it trying to do? Take the dogs. It was trying to take the dogs. Yeah. What did you do? Try to fight it. No, Don't. I wanted to fight it, but I was scared. I'm tough.
I hit it with my skateboard. I mean, my car.
Ma'am, are you okay? Are you in distress? Are you attempting to say pepperoni pizza if you are in distress?
That kind of stuff is so counterproductive too. That kind of stuff, because I don't believe that I possess the secret truth, but I would love for somebody to figure out the truth and make it not be secret. That stuff just like drives me crazy because that just muddies the water so badly.
Mm-hmm. But here we are, how many years later, telling those people's story again.
Right. Yeah.
I have a feeling
again, big X-Files effect there, I think, to some degree, even though the X-Files technically never did a Bigfoot episode.
If you made it this far and you live in that town and you happen to have that surname, I mean no insult to your town, your surname as being common. However, your newspaper has some serious issues with editorial staff.
I feel like there's a very high likelihood that that was a day when the editor was just like, we need to fill 3 column inches, run it, you know.
Well, that's Bigfoot 101 from Arcane Carolinas. I hope that I delivered something that you were able to get a kick out of.
I'm so excited that we're actually talking about this and that we'll talk about this more, because I feel like there are a ton of reports and some of them are probably going to turn out to be really high quality and interesting, fascinating experiences that people are describing. And some of them are going to turn out to be just the hottest garbage. And those are going to be very entertaining in their own way as well.
Yeah. So like Nobby from Western North Carolina is like the big one, right? And lots of people know about Nobby. There's another one where there's an older fella that distinctly set out to say, I'm not trying to make money off of this. This is real. I felt those deserved the respect of their own examination.
Absolutely, yes.
And not be bogged down with the, here's what we think Bigfoot is, here's the history of Bigfoot and wild man appearances, but rather let's examine those stories on their own as a self-contained thing.
The Epic of Gilgamesh, that just blows my mind. That's just amazing.
Goes way back, way back. Thank you to our Patreon backers. As always, you did not pick this topic, but we still love you. I think this is such a delightful topic in general. This is, I think, one of the topics that I find most entertaining and also most like sincerely intellectually engaging, because like I said, I really do think that there are people who are reporting something that is very real to them. And I think that there is such a rich history of obvious scams. You kind of get the best of both worlds when you talk about Sasquatch. Yeah, it's a good time. So until next time, bye. I'm willing to lean back in the chair, but that's it. That's all I've got. You don't want to get up and run and say goodbye? Well, now I'm back. No. I got to do it again. I'm not doing it again. No, I'm good. Charlie, why are you all sweaty? I was podcasting. It was intense. I should stop recording now. Probably. You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it. And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com. If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt. Clothe your body. Drape your body in our wares. Be our living billboards.